So we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Karin here. Karin, you're somebody that has created the identity for so many brands and affected people's lives, and continuously do that. I mean, from naming and coming up with the ideas behind the Kindle, which is such a disruptive product, to TiVo, which changed the way that people consume programming, and coming up with a fun name there, fun identity there for the brand. And then even early on, being involved with the Apple Lisa, and helping to shape that, which was really set the standard for beauty and technology products and design. And so I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So where did your kind of passion for design and visual thinking and identity, where did that come from? Was it something that you always had when you were young? You were looking at different brands and thinking, hey, I can kind of come up with my own idea for this. Like, how did that begin?
Well, I would say that I am insatiably curious. I have been curious all of my life. I had the opportunity to grow up. My dad was an information officer in the Air Force, and we lived all over the world. And I got exposed to multiple languages and multiple cultures. And I really enjoyed learning how each of those cultures and names impacted how people saw the world. So I was a fine art student in college, and doing painting and jewelry making and printmaking and all the things you do. And I took a job from the student bulletin board to do creative research for a design company. And what they needed was somebody to go to the library and get pictures of things, back in the day when you had to go to the library to get pictures. So I found that I had a knack for finding things that other people didn't know how to find. And sometimes I was incredibly lucky, like I would find them on the first take. And you probably know this just from your own experience. You kind of ask somebody a question and they tend to answer with information that you didn't even know that you were looking for. So that's been a part of my work. My first 10 years or so were doing creative research. And then I worked another 10 years with my husband and partner, who is actually the designer of many of those identities that you spoke about. And in the design world, that is the critical element to it. But for me, the strategy and the identity is the part that I've been able to influence and encourage. So that's how I got into this.
Mhm. So how did you come up with your own process for determining the right identity and the design behind a brand? You have a multi-step process on your site. It seems to be that a lot of other brands have trusted that. How did you come up with this process that you use?
Well, just years and years of sitting in meetings and trying to figure out how to get the best answers. I mean, we realized that you needed to ask good questions, and I'm still working on a book that I'm hoping to write called Elegant Questions, Design Answers. And really an elegant question is like our technology. When we have elegant technology, it seems so useful without having to be a whole lot of gears and knobs and everything to do. So the process evolved a little bit out of cognitive analytical therapy, which is a British technology that was developed post-World War II to help people deal with their stresses. And it was a time-limited therapy process. And I find very often with companies, and you mentioned that you all are, in a naming cycle, you know what you want to get to, and you want to get there as quickly as you can. So how do you line things up to be able to put them all in the right place? So we do start with kind of looking at what the ground of something is, everything you've tried before, everything that you've looked at. And then we try to look at where the heck you're going with this. What do you want to be when you achieve your goal? And that's such a great arc to be able to go from that beginning to visualizing the thing that you want to have happen.
Mhm. So you mentioned a little earlier, Karen, about how do kind of asking the questions that maybe you didn't even necessarily know that direction you wanted to go in. Um, how do you kind of determine the direction. I mean, you can understand where they're going in, but yeah, it seems like from your site and from the things that you've done, it's been very much about what the offering is, what the service is, what the product is, what the experience is, and basing something on there. But there's a lot of words you can or ideas you can come up based on that. Like, how do you kind of find something that's unique and different that stands out based on what the experience or product or service is?
Well, there's two parts of it. Sometimes you just know right from the beginning, and it's amazing. It's intuition, it's, all the neuroscience, it's all the things coming together. More often than not, though, you even if you know something like TiVo was obvious to us almost right from the beginning, but it just seemed a bit, too simple, too elegant, so you have to go through the process of having people tell you their ideas. You have to look around, you have to, spend amount of time with it. And literally, as I said, to me, that's one of the things I found is most important is we call it our approach, because I don't want people to think they're going through a process. I want them to feel that they are being able to get in the game with us. So, when you get a present at Christmas, it comes in a great big box very often. And even though it's the coolest present that you've really wanted for the longest time, you set it aside and then you play with the box for a while. And playing with the box is such a great experience because you kind of own that creativity and process. So that's been really critical to figuring out how to help people not only get from where they started, which usually is a pain point, this is something that is uncomfortable, and then they figure out how to get them to where they just feel good. And I feel like, with TiVo, it was someone else walking into a meeting and saying, well, that's the name, isn't it? And it was on a board with a lot of other names as possibilities. And to be more specific, we do bin sorting. So we start with, major land, structures and or, geological forces or imaginary creatures. And just you can hear those three categories. And I know I could see in your eyes, you're already having ideas, and you bin sort through those. And some of them start feeling like fun. They start feeling like things you could live with. And it's there are companies that do the naming that I think of as kind of applied naming. They name you from over here, and then they tell you that's your name, and then you kind of grow into it. But I like to work with the process of where people are bringing that out of themselves and what they're doing. And, again, back to where they want to go, how they want to get there.
Mm-hmm. So when you're coming up with an entirely new name, right? Something that's not just based on something that exists. I mean, how different is that process? Are you still taking a couple different words from one bin, another bin, putting them together, and kind of like how do you determine what can make sense? Is it just the vowels of it, or what is that? What's in that process?
Well, there are, as I said, buckets, and you put things into these buckets. And there's a certain part where there are names that we really get a kick of. I think finally people have registered this name, but we used to throw up NYMBEL, nimble, just to get people's brains to move around a little bit, because it both has a kind of slightly weird, spelling, but it was just to kind of open up the ideas. And we played with nim, NYM, and bell. You play with parts of the world. Play is a super important aspect of all of this. One of the things about design thinking is that it's a little bit like playing air guitar. You get to actually imagine yourself making this great music, and naming is on that category of where, if you're not having fun, if you're not laughing, you're not going to get to the answer that you want. So there are, I love big fat dictionaries because you kind of flop through them. You can search online for things, but there's something about a paper dictionary where you can flop pages and run your finger down and a word just jumps out serendipitously, for you. And to me, again, I don't like things that are applied. I call them veneer, where they're just kind of put on the surface. I like to work with the wood. I like to work with the actual organic thing and help it grow. So I'm a little bit, focused on the fact that I'm a gardener at heart. I like to care for things and see them evolve and grow. So
So how did the involvement with Kindle with Amazon come about? Was that just they saw some of your other work, they reached out to you, and you said, okay, hey, and did they tell you how much did they tell you about the idea before it was out? I mean, what did you even know when you were trying to come up with this the identity behind it?
well, we got an email from a little company named Lab 126, which didn't identify any relationship as being a division of Amazon or anything like that. And what I've sussed out over time is that the people that were in that group were people, as happened in that era of Silicon Valley, that we are all kind of in the same neighborhood, jostling around and getting to know one another. And I would think that our previous work led us to being included in the group that they were considering for this. But, like many of these things, we have to compete with the best for, the opportunity. And why should someone work with us? And we found that the basic thing is just to basically be ourselves. And that lets people kind of realize, oh, okay, we can be ourselves too. The process of the world was that e-readers at that time were dead. Essentially nobody, I mean, Sony, they'd done the beautiful Walkman and whatever. I mean, they were clunky and they were difficult to use. And we were really lucky that Pentagram, as you know, and Bob Bruner had worked on the form factor of and they had done a lot of the preliminary research around the ethos of what the e-reader that Amazon wanted to develop would be. So when we stepped in, had been already a lot of this backgrounding work that I talked about done, but the honesty, and my husband partner used to say that I made CEOs cry, because we sat at the table with Jeff, and what he wanted to do was this thing that people do now, which is to just basically have you tell me about a great book that you just read and have me be able to download it, in a few minutes, or a minute, I think he called it, and get on the plane and read that book while I was going to my next destination. And finding that essence of what he wanted was really critical to, again, as we said, we looked at geological, we looked at literary, we looked at weather, we looked at all kinds of areas and landed on this kind of ancient literary term, which brought us to that name. And it's been very interesting to see how it's lived in the world, because it was one of the first identities that was put next to that powerful name of Amazon, and incorporated the smile underneath, or the arrow underneath it, to connect the two. And that was actually other colleagues of our work to have created that identity, but then we folded them into our approach as well.
Mm-hmm. So once the name Kindle was figured out, was Jeff like right away like, oh, this is amazing, this is a great name? What was the initial reaction of Amazon?
Well, they're always in these processes, a little bit like I told you about TiVo, that it's always difficult to see it the first time around. So it was on many lists of names and words that we had. It was codenamed Fiona, which a lot of Neil Stephenson's book, and a lot of people were actually quite fond of that name because they had lived with it for so long. But we know, just as you're finding with naming something, that getting a name to live in the world, it needs to be recognizable, knowable, all those kinds of things. So it's a slow process. Every naming, it's a slow process to be able to get to.
I was going to ask also, like, how long did it take from once you were working with Amazon to coming up with this name?
Well, originally the launch was planned for, I think, we started in the beginning of the year and it was planned for Father's Day launch. And, we were racing to get everything ready. TiVo was a fascinating one because that they had signed up for the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. And, basically they had this idea and a box. And all of that had to get done. Their entire team worked miracles to get that done in a couple of months. They called themselves the Blue Moon Group because that group, I think that was one of those months where there were, in the 28-day cycle, it fit into 1 month. And it's always fun to be part of those things because everybody's behind the effort. With Amazon, it was similar, but they essentially were ready to launch, but they were also adding more opportunity, more ability for it to be brought out into the world. So by the time that it actually launched, a while later, it had been in development. It basically like a really good pot of soup, that you've got in the back of the stove. It just gets better, as it simmers. I like simmering is also a really good way to think about things. So.
Mhm. So you were also involved with the Abraham Lincoln movie, the Steven Spielberg one, coming up with the positioning behind it, the identity behind it. It was a very, a lot of black. The cover was black and white. You see Abe's face turned to the side. How did you want to convey the character that he had in the identity of it? Like, what were you thinking in terms of going about that and having that visually be there?
Well, that was such an interesting issue. Our colleague, John Sable, was the creative director at Disney at that time, and he had heard me speak about strategic identity a couple of times, and he knew that I tend to go way over here and then bring it back to where you go like, oh yeah, that's it. So he wanted us to work that process with the team at Disney. And it really, and again, I'm saying process when I really truly mean approach, but the bringing their whole group of all the people that were working on all the marketing aspects, all the, the filmmaking aspects, the movie was accomplished, was done, but how to create an identity for it that wouldn't just be another historic biopic. And what we realized was the most impactful thing that resonates with so many people is Lincoln's words. So how do we take Lincoln's words and put them in? And working with the team, we developed a campaign where in all the subway systems, on billboards, everywhere were Lincoln's words kind of leading you into, now I want to meet the man. So it was like we gave people a connection to him that they already knew, but they wanted to be able to go and see him. And the funny thing, of course, about the beautiful side profile is that's just the penny, that's the Lincoln on the penny. And we thought, like, everybody knows this, he's the medallion, the signature that everybody knows. And that was very interesting to be able to, take the Daniel Day-Lewis image and which already had been created to look, as we know Lincoln to be from the penny, but combining those, again, it was a very elegant solution to that. And I one of the things that I love is working with really great teams, because it's not just, as you know, the one idea that makes everything work. It's that idea orchestrated with all of the other elements to bring it together.
Mhm. So when you were working with Floodgate, the name there, it's in the venture capital, it's become an iconic fund. It's one that it's helped many different entrepreneurs, but it's a name that kind of implies a lot of, I don't know, generosity and openness. And, it's something maybe sometimes with VCs, you kind of think that it's a little different at times and not as easy to get capital, and the name is more accessible. I think that's the route they were going for. So how did you come up with the Floodgate approach to it, with this kind of abundance behind their identity?
Well, we had known Mike Maples when he was working at Silicon Graphics in and around that area. And we've since been able to meet his dad, who's a legend, an incredible person in the whole development of this technology and culture. But Mike and Marco were just becoming partners at that time. And she was, she still is, spunky and fun. And she challenged assumptions and she liked to see things in new ways. These are all creative traits. So we went through our normal approach with them of finding out how they wanted to represent themselves, what they saw. He had his whole Thunder Lizards idea that he had built around his investment strategy, that he was looking for, those creatures that would come lumbering across the ocean and bring their imaginative creativity, to a new opportunity in business. And it was an interesting process to, again, you can see that that's actually a natural name. We have done invented names, like TiVo is an invented name, but it references TV and in out from electronics. So it's not unfamiliar, but it's new enough. Floodgate was one where, it's a kind of holding in of what could and will become tidal forces. And that really represented the idea of what Mike and Ann were thinking about of being able to do and what they wanted to be able to do for and with their entrepreneurs that they were essentially nurturing. So that kind of an embrace that the Floodgate gives is a really nice idea to be able to do. And again, we bin sorted into a lot of different categories of things, trying to find something that would fit them, and when you put that thing on, and it fits you and you look good, it's nice.
So just kind of going back a little bit, with your involvement with Apple, Lisa, what were some of your contributions there, and how do you think that that's shifted the way that tech products are created now?
So that was so early on, and I really enjoyed in the beginning. So I talked about doing research for a design company. My friend who became my partner, who became my husband, and now passed, Michael Cronin, had been doing rock and roll posters in the front of a print shop, and he met all these designers, and this world of design just seemed like so much fun, where I said that I've been in the art department, and the art department was competitive, and people were, it just wasn't enough of a market for them. Whereas in the design world, everybody was like, have you met this person? Have you seen this work? And it was collaborative and exciting and fun. So when we were first in San Francisco, and I had gone around to all the studios basically saying I did research for creative people, and everybody said, well, we don't need that. They've been doing it for themselves for all these years. So, but what I did was I met everybody in the design community, because, and this is always a great tip for anybody starting out, each of those people would refer me to 10 or so other people, and then call them and saying, there's this girl and I gave her your name. And so the interesting part about Apple at that time, and I remember when we first saw the first Apple store on the street in Berkeley, and it just the little rainbow logo, and at that point they were really those basically educational tools. And again, through this network of people who know people who we worked with, we were brought in to Apple to just basically do the identity for the Lisa that already had been named, as after Jobs' daughter. And he was also working on the Macintosh at that time, and he was really angry because the Lisa computer was this big clunky box, but he wanted to represent this exciting idea of these big imaginative things happening. And when you look at the Lisa poster, that was pre-Photoshop, pre all kinds of skills. And we happen to know in the profession a wonderful photographer named Charlie Franklin, who, helped us physically set up on a beach at sunset, the photo shoot with, and then he put, blasts and spheres on the beach. And, it was all these things to basically bring this idea. And I wasn't in the room when Michael and Charlie presented the idea to Steve, but the story is that he said, at least the marketing doesn't suck, which is fun, so I personally would have liked to have done a lot more work with them over the years, but there are personalities that match and personalities that don't match in this technology. So we did some amazing things, Christmas cards and other things for Apple that are now all going to end up in the Stanford Silicon Valley archives, which is fun. But at the time, you don't know. I mean, we were in our early 30s and Steve was in his late 20s and mildly obnoxious. So who knew what this was all going to become?
So just the last question that I have, what are some things that you aspire to do next? I mean, you've done so much in so many different industries and created identities that have shaped brands and shaped, just really helped affect the world and inspired other people to follow in those footsteps. But what are some things that you feel like you haven't done yet that you'd like to do?
At one of the most nervous making and also exciting times in culture and history. And we've always been there, but this particular time seems really important. We're dealing with, two possibly serious threats to our, lives and society. One, of course, is the climate transition. We've been overusing the resources, and not recycling in an appropriate way things that we've used. So we have a bit of a messy planet right now. And I really love this planet. I love that we're in a giant universe, but this little ball, that's our home. And then years ago, I had the opportunity to work with some of the people that were paying attention to early AI. And there was a lot of work and thinking about that done, but literally nobody was interested at that point, in the public. There was no application that, it's been seeping like water into culture, all the technological tools that we use where, hey Siri or whatever, they're all part of that process. But I think, languages are first technology. I mean, how to figure out how to, I want that thing, and communicating in multiple languages. The fact that AI is based on large language learning models, think about that. It's taking what we've learned and taught ourselves. And I think the potential is both terrifying and it's also super exciting. So I'm very interested, and I had multiple calls from people a year ago when AI was first launched. People were saying, wow, these prompts, those are your elegant questions, Karin. And it was so interesting to see. So essentially, I've been rethinking, how can I take some of these human-based insights and the playfulness and bring that in, but bring it in a way that's safe. But also, I mean, we're really concerned about hard power and soft power. We live in both of those worlds. And, I hope to be around for another couple of decades, maybe. And I'd like to contribute to that conversation. So that's what's ahead of me.